Why is Xenoblade like this? And this? And this? Do you see it? Do you see what I'm getting at? This is nothing against the games, which I enjoy very much indeed, but just aesthetically, how many other titles would even consider having this level of eyeball-searing complexity on the screen at once? Plenty of games have intricate HUDs and show on-screen information, but it seems characteristic of very Japanese-centric gameplay experiences, such as those from Monolith Soft, that this level of density is even considered as a gameplay option. My curiosity on this issue actually led me to do some research, and I came across some interesting discoveries about the way Japanese people process information compared to people in the West. This isn't a traditional Nintendo Forecast video, whack the playlist on screen if you'd rather watch one of those, but every few weeks I like to try a video that shakes up the formula a little bit, and this one is really, I guess, a cultural deep dive as to how information is presented in games, and in particular, why Xenoblade games are as information dense as they are. If that's for you, settle in for another Nintendo Forecast deep dive. So to give some context to how I came upon this issue at all, one of the most frequently requested videos on this channel is a deep dive into Monolith Soft, in the vein of my other deep dives into Intelligent Systems, Bandai Namco, and Nintendo EPD. Eventually I do plan to get to this, but my response is always the same, that my backlog includes the Xenoblade Chronicles games, and I really want to complete the Switch trilogy before I do the kind of in-depth research necessarily that will likely lead me to spoiling myself. Currently, I'm making my way through Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and while I wouldn't say either of these titles so far are at the absolute pinnacle of my favourites given how competitive the Switch is, it's still a gem of a game with a huge amount recommended, as was its predecessor. But there's no doubt that one of the most onerous aspects of the game, as a filthily casual time-poor gamer, is navigating the learning curve and getting to grips with the astonishing complexity of the world's mechanics, a level of complexity that makes Dungeons & Dragons look like snakes and ladders, and which means that tens of hours in, you're still being introduced to new tutorials for different mechanics. Mechanics which, in the case of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 specifically, they don't store in your tutorials list afterwards, meaning you have to pay close attention or get onto Google post-haste in order to keep up. What I'm saying is that Xenoblade is a game that innately prizes and focuses on complexity and makes no concessions to the audience on this front. But still, the actual information present on screen at times is absolutely vast. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, or the Fire Emblem titles, also contain large amounts of information on screen. They have complex HUDs and there's quite a lot to spot, but generally they don't overwhelm with information in quite the same way that Xenoblade sometimes does. And my contention is that this is because Zelda and to some degree Fire Emblem have been made with a far greater awareness of the tastes of a Western audience. In fact, the Zelda games, while hugely successful for Nintendo, are more dramatic successes in Western markets than in Japan. But Xenoblade is intrinsically Japanese in spirit and style, something that's never more apparent in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, with its goofy departures into Japanese humour. And while these aspects are the most obvious examples of it being a highly Japanese game, it also has a very Asian approach to information presentation. As an example of what I mean, let's take a step back from the games for a second and consider East Asian website design. Text tends to be small and there tends to be an awful lot of it. There seem to be more columns, more bright icons, and sometimes flashing elements. To the Western eye, it can often seem overwhelming, but it seems that to a Japanese eye, this design is actually rather reassuring. Japan is a nation with a much more conformist culture than many Western countries. While the philosophies of the West, and particularly in America, trend towards a focus on the primacy of independence, freedom, standing out and asserting points of difference, this remains anathema for many African and Asian traditions. An Apple-style, sleek, individualistic approach requires a mindset different from the norm, and the norm is to bombard people with complexity, and Japanese people appear to prefer this. People like to avoid risk, and when purchasing items, the average Japanese consumer likes to know that there is a lot of information being provided. Think about the many sights and sounds of Tokyo. Times Square may seem busy and provides a bit of information overload, but it's nothing on the likes of Shibuya. Remember also that Japanese is a language which does not have capital letters, and which between its two alphabets has a large amount of characters compared to most Western alphabets, even before you include the roughly 50,000 kanji characters and the frequent use of Latin script. They're used to having a vast amount of symbols conveying information quite precisely, but generally without emphasis or hierarchy in terms of the presentation. Sticking with websites for a second, it's interesting to look at Nintendo's own site. As with most of their content these days, the Nintendo website design is standardized across the regions to a very large degree, and I think therefore we see here a kind of balance of both kinds of aesthetics. It's far less complicated than the minimalist look of many major Western tech sites such as Google and Apple, but it's not nearly so dripping with information as the Japanese retailers, and that's because they want one consistent corporate approach that offers consumers in the East the level of complexity that is reassuring to them, but also to make their web offer accessible to Western audiences who favour clarity and simplicity. Now, I think there's a good case to say that this affects the way Xenoblade Chronicles is constructed. If you play a Xenoblade game, you really need to play it as a Japanese gamer would, and think of its seemingly endless rabbit warren of menus and optical migraine of on-screen icons in the way that people from East Asia appeared to, not as alarming or overwhelming, but comforting. The way the game offers you freedom is to tell you literally everything, often all at once, but that means that you as the player are there to navigate this complexity and to master it. As a relatively new player to the series, there have certainly been moments where I've chafed against the game's density, and I can't say I've got to grips, or even feel likely to get to grips, with all the innumerable systems that the title offers, but I do get the relaxing quality of the game, that sometimes the grinding and the wandering and the becoming lost in the game's myriad menus and vast item list grant a different kind of freedom. Of course, Nintendo is a company with an international outlook, and this does raise the question of whether Monolith Soft would ever adjust their approach to menus to cater to a Western audience. Witcher, Elden Ring and Breath of the Wild are all games that really face their Western audiences, and while they are information dense, they feel a little more aesthetically sparse compared to moments in Xenoblade. In particular, I appreciate the way that Tears of the Kingdom focuses a lot on signposting within the game world to nudge players with slightly different coloured rocks indicating a bombable wall as opposed to a neon blue icon. That's partly reflective of being a different kind of game with a very different history, and of course Zelda has always had bombable walls if you look carefully enough, but also I think accounts for how well it translates out of the developer's home region. I think there must be some kind of soft pressure exerted on Monolith Soft to try to open up the game's intricate systems, but equally the studio is 3% owned by its founders, and Nintendo is very good at respecting, even revering, people of true creative genius and letting them do their own thing. What would be the point of doing more Xenoblade if Xenoblade became a watered-down shadow of its former self? They're also an intrinsically Japanese company, so they understand how to target a Japanese market, even if it sometimes doesn't lead to them capturing the broad audiences of a Mario or Zelda in the rest of the world. Therefore, I would not expect that much to change, and I rather hope it doesn't. What might change, of course, is a convergence of different tastes over time. With the advent of the internet and the trend towards people being more and more exposed to art and media from other cultures, K-pop and Bollywood and Scandi noir, it's possible that we will start to see a greater appreciation for different international approaches. Younger Japanese developers may feel less wedded to ultra-dense methods of presenting information, while people abroad who have grown up with the likes of Xenoblade will become more accepting of it. I'm not sure I can put a forecast on this, as it's a bit too abstract a concept to nail down, but I think there's a chance that Japanese design philosophies could change quite a bit in the decades to come to accommodate a variety of tastes, while hopefully keeping what made these games so distinctive and original in the first place. At any rate, I found this a rather interesting diversion, and it kind of makes sense and contextualises the game for me. Game reactions aren't really this channel's focus, but if you'd be interested in my thoughts on these Xenoblade titles as a new player, do let me know. It'll be a while before I get there though, as I'm still relatively early in 2, and with Famicom Detective Club and Echoes of Wisdom on the slate, it may be some time before I even finish that title. I know that this channel has viewers from across the world, including in places like Korea, China and Japan, so I would be very interested to hear other perspectives on this. And as ever, feel free to like, subscribe, comment, share, dive into the Patreon or link below, and or check out one of these videos on screen for more. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.